In a fire station in Livermore, California, a light bulb has been burning since 1901. Not a replica. Not a replacement. The original hand-blown carbon filament bulb, manufactured by the Shelby Electric Company of Shelby, Ohio, screwed into a socket above a fire truck bay more than 120 years ago. It has outlasted every firefighter who has ever served beneath it. It has outlasted the company that made it. It has outlasted every argument ever offered by every major lighting manufacturer that bulbs simply cannot last that long. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. The Shelby bulb is not unique because it survived. It is unique because the engineering philosophy that created it was systematically and deliberately abandoned. Not because it failed. Because it worked. That bulb operates on a hand-wound carbon filament, roughly twice the thickness of the filaments used in bulbs manufactured just 30 years later. The glass envelope was blown by hand, sealed in a process that took longer and cost more per unit. Shelby Electric advertised their bulbs to last at minimum 30,000 hours. Independent testing at the time suggested some units could exceed 100,000. That is more than 11 years of continuous use. The bulb in Livermore has been running for over 1 million hours. It dims, it wavers, it never stops. And the question is not why this bulb survived. The question is why no bulb made after 1924 was ever designed to do the same. The answer lives in a filing cabinet metaphorically, though the original documents were quite real. On Christmas Eve, 1924, representatives from the world's largest lighting manufacturers met in Geneva, Switzerland. Osram from Germany, Philips from the Netherlands, Compagnie des Lampes from France, Associated Electrical Industries from the United Kingdom, and General Electric through its international subsidiary, International General Electric. Together they formed an entity called Phoebus, named, with no apparent sense of irony, after the Greek god of light. Phoebus was not a research consortium, it was not a standards body. It was a cartel, and its stated, documented, internally circulated purpose was to reduce the operational lifespan of the incandescent light bulb from an average of approximately 2,500 hours to exactly 1,000 hours. Not approximately, exactly 1,000 hours became the mandated ceiling. The cartel's internal documents, many of which survived because Swiss regulatory investigators seized them in the 1940s, reveal a system of enforcement that would be remarkable in any industry. Each member company was required to submit bulbs for testing at a central laboratory in Switzerland. If a company's bulbs lasted longer than 1,000 hours, that company was fined. Not praised, fined. The penalty structure scaled upward the longer your bulb lasted, the more you paid. A bulb lasting 1,500 hours triggered a fine nearly 5 times larger than one lasting 1,200. The engineering departments of these companies, staffed by people who had spent entire careers making filaments stronger, more durable, more efficient, were now formally instructed to make them weaker. And they did. The average lifespan of a commercial light bulb dropped from 2,500 hours in 1924 to 1,500 hours by 1930, to just under 1,000 hours by 1940. The engineering worked in both directions. They had always known how to make things last. Now they knew exactly how to make things fail. Here is what you need to understand about the era that made this possible. The 1920s were the first decade in which electrical infrastructure had spread far enough to create a true mass consumer market for light bulbs. Before electrification reached critical density, light bulbs were a semi-luxury, purchased infrequently, expected to last. The Shelby Electric model depended on that economy: sell fewer, charge more, build trust through durability. But as the grid expanded, as millions of new homes and businesses connected, the mathematics of manufacturing shifted. A bulb that lasted 30,000 hours in a market of 10 million customers meant a replacement cycle measured in years, perhaps decades. A bulb that lasted 1,000 hours in the same market meant a replacement cycle measured in months. The Phoebus Cartel did not need to invent planned obsolescence as a theory. They needed only to observe that durability and perpetual revenue growth were incompatible, and then choose which one to keep. Shelby Electric did not survive the transition. The company had been acquired and folded into a larger entity by the early 1930s. Its manufacturing methods, the thicker filaments, the slower production, the hand-sealed envelopes, were discontinued, not because they were inferior. The Livermore bulb, burning quietly in a California fire station, is a standing, glowing refutation of that claim. They were discontinued because they were too good. That is not rhetoric. That is the internal logic of the cartel's own documents. Durability was the problem they were solving. Consider what happened next across multiple industries within a single generation. In 1924, the Phoebus Cartel standardized premature failure in light bulbs. In 1928, the American automobile industry, led by General Motors under Alfred Sloan, formalized the annual model year not because of engineering improvement, but because consumer research showed that styling changes alone could drive replacement purchases of mechanically functional vehicles. By the mid-1930s, DuPont's research division had developed nylon stockings so durable that internal testers complained they could not wear them out. The product was reformulated before mass release to ensure a shorter lifespan and a faster repurchase cycle. A DuPont engineer, whose name was withheld in the internal memo that surfaced decades later, described the directive in a single sentence that has never been officially contested: make it good enough to sell, not good enough to last. In 1932, a real estate broker and pamphleteer named Bernard London published a 20-page document titled Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. The title was not metaphorical. London argued, explicitly and in print, that the United States government should impose legal expiration dates on consumer goods, shoes, clothing, appliances, furniture after which ownership would become illegal and the items would be surrendered for destruction. The economy, London argued, was suffering not because people lacked money, but because the things they had already purchased refused to break. He wanted the government to force failure into every object. The pamphlet did not become law. But its logic did become practice. Within a decade of its publication, the average operational lifespan of American household appliances had decreased across every major category. Refrigerators built in 1930 lasted an average of 22 years. Refrigerators built in 1950 lasted 14. The ones built in 1970 lasted 11. Today the average is 7 to 8. The pattern does not require conspiracy to explain. It requires only incentive, coordination, and the institutional willingness to treat durability as a defect. And once you see it in light bulbs, you cannot unsee it. The Phoebus Cartel's 1,000-hour standard was not a suggestion. It was enforced through financial penalties, laboratory testing, and contractual obligation. The internal correspondence, much of it preserved in the Swiss Federal Archives and partially digitized by researchers at Helmut Kurger's research group at the Berlin University of the Arts, reveals a level of engineering precision devoted entirely to calibrated failure. Filament alloys were reformulated, wire diameters were reduced, glass compositions were altered to increase thermal stress at the filament junction. These were not cost-saving shortcuts. In several documented cases, the reformulated bulbs cost more to manufacture than the durable ones they replaced. The goal was not to reduce production cost. The goal was to reduce product life, and the cost of achieving that reduction was treated as a marketing investment. There is a moment in any investigation where two separate patterns stop being parallel and start being structural. The light bulb cartel and the broader philosophy of planned obsolescence are not merely related by chronology. They are related by architecture. The Phoebus Cartel proved, in documented practice, that a global industry could coordinate the deliberate degradation of its own product, enforce compliance through financial penalties, and suffer no meaningful consequence for decades. The model worked, and it worked so well that its essential logic engineer failure, monetize replacement, treat longevity as a threat, became the invisible operating system of 20th century manufacturing. What was lost in that transition was not just durability, it was knowledge. The engineers at Shelby Electric understood carbon filament behavior at a level that has not been commercially replicated since, because no commercial entity has had a financial reason to replicate it. The craft of building things to last became, within a single generation, an economic liability. The grandchildren of the people who made the Livermore bulb grew up in a world where a bulb lasting 2,000 hours was marketed as exceptional. They had no reason to question it. The Phoebus Cartel's greatest achievement was not the 1,000-hour bulb. It was the belief, implanted across an entire civilization, that 1,000 hours was normal, that failure was natural, that the built world was supposed to break. The institutional mechanisms of this erasure are specific and traceable. In 1951, the Phoebus Cartel was formally dissolved after legal pressure from multiple European governments. But by then, the 1,000-hour standard had become an industry norm so deeply embedded that its enforcement no longer required a cartel. Manufacturers continued to produce bulbs with virtually identical lifespans for decades afterward, not because they were colluding, but because the engineering knowledge, the manufacturing tooling, the supply chains, and the consumer expectations had all been rebuilt around the assumption of planned failure. The cartel had become unnecessary because its logic had become the atmosphere. Academic study of planned obsolescence remained remarkably thin for the rest of the 20th century. Vance Packard's 1960 book, The Waste Makers, brought the concept to a popular audience, but it was treated as social commentary, not industrial history. Giles Slade's Made to Break, published in 2006, was the first major English-language work to treat planned obsolescence as a documented institutional practice with traceable origins and specific actors. The Phoebus Cartel was mentioned, but the Swiss archives containing the internal correspondence, the testing protocols, the penalty schedules, these were not widely digitized or translated until the 2010s. For nearly a century, the most detailed evidence of the most consequential industrial conspiracy in modern manufacturing history sat in filing cabinets in Bern, largely unexamined by English-speaking researchers. Not classified, not destroyed, just unvisited. The most effective form of suppression is not a locked door, it is a door nobody thinks to open. The physical evidence, though, resists forgetting. The Livermore bulb is the most famous, but it is not the only survivor. Shelby Electric bulbs have been found in attics, basements, and decommissioned buildings across the American Midwest, many still functional when tested. A collector in Ohio maintains a small archive of working Shelby units, several of which have been tested by independent engineers, and found to have filament structures consistent with the company's original design specifications that no major manufacturer has used since the 1920s. The filaments are thicker. The carbon is denser. The connection points are reinforced in ways that add fractions of a cent to manufacturing cost and years to operational life. In Livermore, the fire station has installed a webcam pointed at the bulb. It streams continuously. You can watch it right now if you want a small amber glow in a concrete room, unchanged since the McKinley administration. The fire department has changed. The trucks have changed. The city has changed. The bulb has not. It was built in an era when the question, how long should this last, had a different answer. An answer that was not wrong. An answer that was not impractical. An answer that was, by specific and documented decision, made to disappear. The Phoebus Cartel did not invent greed. They did not invent capitalism. They did not even invent the idea that products could be made less durable. What they invented was the system, the testing, the enforcement, the fines for durability, the institutional architecture that turned longevity into a violation. Every product you own that fails 1 month after its warranty expires is not the victim of entropy. It is the inheritor of a decision made on Christmas Eve, 1924, in a Geneva conference room, by men who understood exactly how long a light bulb could last. The Livermore bulb knows, too. It has been answering the question for 120 years, and no one in the industry has ever been willing to ask it again. A single filament, still burning, in a room full of things built to break.